The bitter December wind whipped across the streets of Leadville, Colorado, as Prudence Baker struggled to button her worn coat over her swollen belly. 6 months pregnant and alone in the world since her husband Thomas had been killed in a mining accident, she had no choice but to brave the harsh elements to obtain essential supplies. Her meager savings were dwindling, and the small cabin Thomas had built for them at the edge of town felt emptier with each passing day. Leadville in 1879 was a booming silver mining town, nestled high in the Rocky Mountains at over 10,000 feet above sea level. The altitude made the winters harsher, the air thinner, and life harder for everyone, especially a woman in Prudence's condition. At 23, she had already experienced more hardship than many twice her age. Her auburn hair, once vibrant and lustrous, was now often hidden beneath a practical bonnet, and her green eyes had lost some of their sparkle since Thomas's death. Prudence drew a deep breath before pushing open the door to Wilcox's general store, the bell above announcing her arrival. The warmth inside was a welcome relief from the cutting cold, but the atmosphere chilled quickly as Mr. Wilcox looked up from his ledger. "Mrs. Baker," he said curtly, his mustache twitching with disapproval. "I believe I made myself clear during your last visit." Prudence straightened her back, one hand unconsciously moving to her belly. "Mr. Wilcox, I have the money to pay. All I need are basic supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and some salt pork. And I told you, Mrs. Baker, I don't serve your kind anymore." His voice was low but firm, intended not to carry to the other customers browsing the shelves. "A woman in your position with no husband should have left town by now. It's not proper. My husband is dead, Mr. Wilcox." "Not absent by choice," Prudence replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "This is my home. I have nowhere else to go. Not my concern. There are places for women like you." Wilcox turned his attention back to his ledger, a clear dismissal. "I suggest you try the store in Oro City. It's only 5 miles. 5 miles might as well have been 50 in her condition and with snow threatening to fall again." Prudence felt the eyes of the other customers on her, some sympathetic, others judging. No one spoke up. In a town driven by reputation and gossip, few were willing to risk their standing to defend a pregnant widow whom rumors had already begun to swirl around. "Please," she said, lowering her voice. "I have a baby coming. I can't make it to Oro City today." "Then you should have thought about that before. I'll take care of the lady's order," a deep voice interrupted from behind her. Prudence turned to see a tall man removing his hat as he stepped forward. He wasn't from Leadville, at least. She'd never seen him before, and in a town of this size, strangers were notable. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and the revolver holstered at his hip spoke of someone accustomed to the dangers of the frontier. Despite the winter, his skin was tanned from long hours outdoors, contrasting with eyes the color of a summer sky. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a strong jaw currently set in determination. "Lucas Vance," he said, nodding to Prudence before turning his attention back to Wilcox. "I heard this lady needs supplies, and I'm in need of some myself. We can make it one order." Wilcox's expression soured further. "Mr. Vance, you're new in town, so perhaps you don't understand how things work here. I understand just fine." Lucas interrupted, his voice remaining calm, but carrying an edge of steel. "I understand that a general store is meant to serve the general public, and this lady is part of that public." He placed a small leather pouch on the counter. The distinctive clink of gold coins was unmistakable. "Now, if you'd be so kind as to fill our orders, I'd be much obliged." The storekeeper's eyes darted between the pouch, Lucas, and Prudence. After a moment's hesitation, greed won out over principle. "Very well," he muttered, pulling out a sheet of paper. "What will you be needing, Mrs. Baker?" Relief flooded through Prudence, though it was mixed with embarrassment at needing rescue. "Thank you," she said to Lucas, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a slight smile. "Let's get your supplies first." For the next 10 minutes, Prudence listed her modest needs while Lucas added his own more substantial order. Wilcox worked in sullen silence, occasionally shooting disapproving glances at them both. When everything was gathered, Lucas insisted on paying for it all despite Prudence's protests. "You can settle with me later if it bothers you," he said, loading the supplies into a canvas sack. "But right now, let's get you and these goods home before that snow starts falling." Outside, The temperature had dropped further, and dark clouds loomed ominously over the mountains. Prudence pulled her coat tighter. "I can manage from here," she said, reaching for the sack, though she knew carrying it all the way to her cabin would be a struggle. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Madam, I mean no disrespect, but you look like you're about to bring a new life into this world, and that path ahead doesn't look friendly." He nodded toward the snow-dusted road leading out of town. "Where's your home?" "About a mile east, near Stray Horse Creek," she admitted reluctantly. "But then that's where I'm headed," he said with finality, hoisting the supplies over his shoulder. "I've got my horse tied up at the livery. You can ride, and I'll walk alongside." "Mr. Vance, I appreciate your help in the store, but I can't accept—" "Mrs. Baker," he interrupted gently. "I was raised by a mother who'd tan my hide, even now if she knew I let a pregnant woman walk a mile in this weather carrying supplies. So you'd actually be doing me a favor by accepting my help." His smile was disarming, genuine in a way that Prudence hadn't experienced since Thomas died. The loneliness of the past months pressed down on her suddenly, and she found herself nodding in agreement. "Thank you," she said simply. Lucas retrieved his horse from the livery, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper. He helped Prudence onto the saddle with careful hands, then secured the supplies behind her. As they set off, snow began to fall in lazy flakes that soon intensified into a steady curtain of white. "You've got good timing, Mrs. Baker," Lucas commented as they made their way out of town. "Another hour, and this trail would be treacherous." "Prudence," she said after a moment. "My name is Prudence." "Prudence," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "It suits you." The journey to her cabin took longer than usual with the weather worsening, but Lucas maintained a steady pace, occasionally checking on her comfort. He asked no personal questions, instead pointing out interesting features of the landscape or sharing anecdotes about his travels. His voice was a comfortable presence against the lonely whistle of the wind. By the time they reached the small cabin Thomas had built, snow was accumulating rapidly. Smoke curled from the chimney. Prudence had made sure to bank the fire before leaving, and the sight of home brought a wave of relief. "This is it," she said as Lucas helped her down from Copper. "It's not much, but it's mine." The cabin was indeed modest. A single room with a stone fireplace, a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, and a cupboard for food and dishes. But it was solidly built, with tight seams to keep out the mountain cold and windows positioned to catch the morning light. Lucas carried the supplies inside and set them on the table while Prudence stoked the fire. The domestic scene felt strangely natural, though they were still strangers. "I can't thank you enough," Prudence said, turning to face him as warmth began to return to the room. "Not just for carrying everything, but for standing up for me in the store. Mr. Wilcox has been difficult since Thomas passed." "Your husband?" Lucas asked, his expression softening. Prudence nodded, one hand moving to her belly. "He died in a mine collapse 4 months ago. We'd just found out about the baby a week before." She hadn't meant to share so much, but something about Lucas's presence made the words come easily. "I'm sorry," he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice broke through her carefully maintained composure. She turned away quickly, blinking back tears. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, desperate to change the subject. "It's the least I can offer after all your help." "That would be mighty welcome," Lucas replied, understanding in his eyes. "It's been a long ride from Denver." As Prudence prepared the coffee, Lucas took Copper to the small lean-to stable attached to the cabin. By the time he returned, stomping snow from his boots, she had the coffee brewing and was unpacking the supplies. "You're new to Leadville," she observed as he hung his coat and hat on a peg by the door. "Just passing through, or that was the plan." Lucas accepted the steaming mug she offered with a grateful nod. "I was heading to California, but this weather might convince me to winter here." "California's a long way," Prudence commented. "What's waiting for you there?" "Nothing specific," he admitted. "Just opportunity. I've spent the last few years working cattle drives in Texas, but I'm looking for something different. Maybe try my hand at prospecting." Prudence couldn't help the small smile that curved her lips. "Half the men in Leadville are looking for silver. You could save yourself the journey and try your luck here." "Maybe I will," he said, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of his mug. The snowfall had intensified into a full blizzard by the time they'd finished their coffee, the wind howling around the cabin's corners. Prudence moved to the window, concern etching her features. "You can't travel in this," she stated, turning back to Lucas. "It would be foolish to try." He nodded, though he looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to impose." "It's not an imposition. It's common sense," she replied firmly. "I have enough food now, thanks to you, and the cabin stays warm enough with the fire. You can take the bed, and I'll sleep by the fire." Lucas interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I've spent plenty of nights under the stars. A spot on your floor is luxury by comparison." The arrangement decided, Prudence prepared a simple supper of beans, salt pork, and biscuits. They ate at the small table, the storm creating a cocoon of isolation around the cabin. Lucas shared stories of the cattle drives and the characters he'd met along the way. His tales brought laughter to Prudence for the first time in months, and she found herself reluctantly sharing memories of her life before Leadville, of growing up in Missouri and meeting Thomas when his family moved to town. "He was so determined to make a better life," she said softly, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden tabletop. "We came west because the mines promised good money. He was saving every penny to buy land, to start a ranch." Her voice caught. "He never even saw the snow on the mountains." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," Prudence agreed. "But dreams don't keep you warm at night, and they don't put food on the table for a child." She sighed, looking around the cabin. "I don't know what I'm going to do once the baby comes. I can't work in the laundry anymore. They let me go when I started showing. And no one in town will hire a widow with a newborn. What about family? Anyone who could help?" She shook her head. "My parents are gone. Thomas's family is back east, and they never approved of him marrying me or coming west. I haven't heard from them since we left." The fire popped and crackled in the silence that followed. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside, a different kind of tension was building, the connection between two lonely souls finding unexpected common ground. "What about you?" Prudence asked eventually. "Do you have family waiting somewhere?" Lucas's smile turned wistful. "My mother passed 3 years ago. My father before that. I have a sister in St. Louis, married with children. We write, but our paths don't cross much these days." As the evening wore on, the small cabin grew more comfortable with shared stories and quiet moments. When Prudence finally retired to her bed, leaving Lucas with blankets near the fire, she felt a strange mixture of guilt and contentment. Guilt for enjoying another man's company when Thomas was barely cold in his grave, and contentment at having human connection after months of isolation. Sleep came fitfully, her growing child restless within her. In the depths of night, she woke to find Lucas adding wood to the fire, his profile outlined in amber light. He moved with quiet efficiency, careful not to disturb her. Prudence closed her eyes, feigning sleep, but the image stayed with her, a stranger who had shown more kindness in one day than the town had in months. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine that transformed the snowbound landscape into a glittering wonderland. The storm had passed, leaving nearly 2 feet of fresh snow blanketing the area. Lucas was already awake when Prudence rose, having rekindled the fire and brought in more firewood from the stack outside. "Good morning," he greeted her, a pot of coffee already brewing. "Hope I didn't wake you." "No," she assured him, suddenly self-conscious in her nightdress and shawl. I'll get dressed." She retreated behind a screen in the corner to change into a simple dress, aware of his presence in a way that made her cheeks warm. When she emerged, he had breakfast waiting, simple fare of coffee and leftover biscuits with preserves, but it was the thoughtfulness that touched her. "The snow's deep, but the sky's clear," Lucas observed as they ate. "I should be able to make it back to town without trouble." Prudence nodded, ignoring the sinking feeling in her chest. Of course he would leave. He had his own journey to continue, his own life to lead. Their paths had crossed briefly, nothing more. "Thank you again for everything," she said formally. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been at the store yesterday." Lucas studied her for a moment. "What will you do for supplies next time?" "Wilcox isn't likely to change his mind about serving you." The question had plagued her all night. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe I can find someone in town willing to purchase things for me. Or perhaps I'll have to make the journey to Oro City after all." "Not in your condition, and not alone," Lucas stated firmly. He seemed to be considering something, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he spoke again. I meant what I said about possibly wintering here. The snow's only going to get worse before it gets better, and California will still be there in the spring. Prudence's heart skipped, but she kept her expression neutral. Leadville has several boarding houses if you're looking for accommodation. Actually, Lucas said, meeting her gaze directly, I have a proposition that might benefit us both. I need a place to stay for the winter, and you need help with supplies and preparing for the baby. I'm handy with tools, I can hunt, and I know my way around a kitchen well enough not to starve. Are you suggesting? Prudence began, uncertain. I'm suggesting a practical arrangement, Lucas clarified quickly. I'll help with what needs doing around here, make supply runs to town, and ensure you and your child are provided for through the winter. In return, I get a roof over my head. Come spring, we part ways with no obligations. Prudence was speechless. The offer was tempting more than tempting. It was a potential lifeline. But propriety warred with practicality. People would talk, she said finally. They already do. Lucas shrugged. Let them. Would you rather face their gossip or try to survive the winter alone? Put like that, the decision seemed obvious. And yet, Prudence hesitated. I can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment. Just shelter and a purpose for a few months. He leaned forward. Prudence, I won't pretend I don't have selfish reasons. Winter in the mountains is brutal for a man alone. But I believe we could help each other. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, as if voicing an opinion. Prudence placed a hand on her belly, thinking of the months ahead, the birth, the recovery, caring for a newborn in the Colorado winter. Pride was a luxury she could ill afford. All right, she said finally. Until spring. Lucas's smile was warm with relief. Until spring, he agreed, extending his hand across the table. As their fingers met in a handshake that sealed their arrangement, Prudence couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed irrevocably. For better or worse remained to be seen. The first days of their arrangement were awkward, both of them navigating the unfamiliar territory of sharing space with a stranger. Lucas insisted on sleeping by the fireplace despite Prudence's offers to construct a more comfortable arrangement. He spent the daylight hours chopping and stacking additional firewood, repairing small issues around the cabin, and clearing paths through the snow. Prudence, meanwhile, maintained the domestic aspects of their cohabitation, cooking, cleaning, and preparing for the baby's arrival. A week after Lucas's arrival, he announced his intention to ride into town for additional supplies and to check on accommodations for his horse, who had been sharing the small stable with Prudence's milk cow, Bessie. Is there anything specific you need? He asked as he prepared to leave. Prudence hesitated before retrieving a small bundle of fabric from a trunk. If you could inquire about thread matching these colors, I'd appreciate it. I'm working on a quilt for the baby. Lucas accepted the scraps, carefully tucking them into his coat pocket. I'll see what they have. And I'll avoid Wilcox's if possible. Thank you, she said, touched by his consideration. And Lucas, be careful what you say to people about our arrangement. I know it's proper in our eyes, but I understand, he assured her. I'll be discreet. After he left, Prudence found herself restless, moving from one task to another without settling. The cabin felt different with Lucas gone, emptier somehow, despite having lived alone for months before his arrival. She tried to focus on her sewing, but found her thoughts drifting to him instead. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. How he always asked her opinion before making any changes to the cabin. The gentle way he spoke about her coming child, as if its arrival was something he too anticipated with hope rather than dread. It was foolish, she knew, to develop any attachment. Their arrangement was temporary and practical. Come spring, he would continue his journey to California, and she would face her new life as a mother alone. But in the quiet moments, when they sat by the fire and talked of their pasts and their truncated dreams, Prudence felt something growing between them that defied practical consideration. Lucas returned late in the afternoon, his coat dusted with fresh snow and his arms full of packages. His expression was tighter than when he'd left, a certain tension around his eyes that hadn't been there before. I found your thread, he said, placing a small package on the table. And some additional supplies I thought might be useful. Thank you, Prudence replied, noting his unusual terseness. Was everything all right in town? Lucas busied himself with unpacking the supplies, avoiding her gaze. Fine. The usual. Lucas, she pressed gently. What happened? He sighed, finally meeting her eyes. Nothing worth concerning yourself with. Just some talk at the saloon. About me, she guessed, her stomach sinking. About us, he corrected. Word has spread that I'm staying here. As you predicted, people have drawn their own conclusions. Prudence's cheeks burned with embarrassment. I'm sorry. I didn't think news would travel so quickly. It's not your fault, Lucas assured her, his expression softening. And frankly, I don't care what they think. But, he hesitated. But what? There were some men talking about coming out here, supposedly to check on your welfare. I don't trust their intentions. Fear sliced through Prudence. She knew exactly the type of men Lucas was referring to, the same ones who had made increasingly unwelcome overtures after Thomas's death, assuming her vulnerability made her available. Did they say when? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas shook his head. They were drunk enough that it might have been empty talk, but I'll be on alert just in case. That night, sleep eluded Prudence. She lay awake listening to the wind and the occasional pop from the fireplace, her mind racing with worries. What if men from town did come? What if their presence here put Lucas in danger? What if the gossip grew so vicious that it followed her child throughout its life in Leadville? A particularly strong gust of wind rattled the window, and Prudence startled. In the dim light from the banked fire, she saw Lucas sit up from his pallet, instantly alert. Just the wind, she said softly. He nodded, but didn't immediately lie back down. You should try to sleep, he advised. It's not good for you or the baby to be awake all night worrying. I know, she agreed. But my mind won't quiet. Lucas was silent for a moment. Then, to her surprise, he began to speak in a low, melodious voice. He told a story about a young brave who journeyed to the stars to find a cure for his ailing village. The tale was beautifully crafted, with just enough adventure to be engaging, but told in soothing cadences meant to lull rather than excite. Where did you learn that story? Prudence asked when he finished, feeling more relaxed than she had all evening. From a Comanche woman who helped raise me, Lucas replied. My father was a rancher in Texas, and after my mother died when I was young, a local tribe took me in during the days while my father worked. Running Deer told stories to help the children sleep during the hottest part of the day. It's beautiful, Prudence murmured, her eyelids growing heavy. Thank you. Sleep now, Lucas said gently. I'll keep watch. And somehow, with his reassuring presence just a few feet away, Prudence finally surrendered to sleep. The threatened visit from town never materialized, whether due to the weather, sobriety returning, or Lucas's stern reputation, Prudence couldn't say. But as December deepened and Christmas approached, a new rhythm established itself in the small cabin. Lucas took charge of the outdoor work, maintaining their paths through the snow, caring for the animals, and hunting to supplement their supplies. Prudence managed the household and continued preparing for the baby, sewing tiny garments and completing the quilt with the thread Lucas had brought. They began sharing more openly about their lives. Lucas spoke of his years on cattle drives, of the camaraderie and dangers, of the vastness of the Texas sky that had both inspired and oppressed him. Prudence described her childhood in Missouri, her courtship with Thomas, and their journey west with so many dreams that now lay buried alongside her husband. Do you think you'll stay in Leadville after the baby comes? Lucas asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Prudence working on her sewing while he cleaned his revolver. I've considered leaving, she admitted. But where would I go? At least here I have a roof that's mine, land that Thomas paid for. She sighed, setting aside her work to rub her lower back, which ached constantly these days. And to be honest, I'm afraid to travel with a newborn, especially alone. Lucas nodded thoughtfully, reassembling his weapon with practiced movements. You could sell the cabin, use the money to start fresh somewhere without the memories or the gossip. The suggestion made practical sense, but Prudence felt a pang at the thought of leaving the home Thomas had built for them, the last physical connection to the man she had loved. Perhaps, she said noncommittally. What about you? Still set on California when spring comes? A shadow passed across Lucas's face. That was the plan. But, she prompted, sensing his hesitation. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the fire. Plans change, he said finally. People change. Something in his tone made Prudence's heart beat faster, but she didn't press further. The unspoken connection between them had grown stronger with each passing day, but neither had acknowledged it directly. Their arrangement was supposed to be practical, temporary. Introducing feelings would only complicate matters and potentially lead to more pain. Christmas arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and a rare sunny day. Lucas had disappeared early in the morning, saying only that he needed to check some traps he'd set. Prudence used his absence to finish the small gift she'd been working on for him, a new woolen scarf to replace his frayed one, knitted in secret during the hours he spent outside. When he returned mid-afternoon, his cheeks were red from the cold and his arms full of pine boughs. "Merry Christmas," he announced, stamping snow from his boots. "I thought we might bring some green inside." Together they arranged the fragrant boughs around the cabin, the simple decoration transforming the space with holiday cheer. Lucas had also managed to shoot a rabbit, which Prudence prepared for their Christmas dinner along with the last of the potatoes and some dried apple pie for dessert. As they sat down to eat, Lucas produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "It's not much," he said, sliding it across the table to her. "But I wanted you to have something today." Touched by the gesture, Prudence unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a beautifully carved wooden rattle, the handle smooth and the head containing small objects that created a gentle sound when shaken. "Lucas," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate design. "Did you make this?" He nodded, looking somewhat embarrassed. "In the evenings when you were asleep. I noticed you didn't have many toys prepared yet." Tears pricked at Prudence's eyes. The thought that he had been planning for her child's arrival, creating something with his own hands for a baby that wasn't his, moved her deeply. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." She gave him her gift then, and he seemed equally touched by the simple scarf, wrapping it around his neck immediately and declaring it the finest he'd ever owned. The exchange of presents shifted something between them, acknowledging the care that had developed beyond their practical arrangement. After dinner, with the cabin warm and pine-scented, they sat close by the fire. Prudence found herself speaking of Christmases past, of traditions with her family, and later with Thomas. Lucas listened attentively, occasionally offering his own memories of holidays on the ranch or on the trail. "This is different than I expected," Prudence admitted as the evening deepened. "When Thomas died, I thought all joy had left my life. I couldn't imagine celebrating anything again, especially not with the baby coming and no way to provide for it properly." "And now?" Lucas asked quietly. She met his gaze, allowing herself to acknowledge the truth. "Now I feel hope again. And I have you to thank for that." Something shifted in Lucas's expression, his eyes darkening with an emotion Prudence was afraid to name. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "Prudence," he began, his voice low. "I know our arrangement was meant to be temporary, but a sharp knock at the door cut him off, making them both jump." Lucas was on his feet instantly, one hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Were you expecting anyone?" he asked in a whisper. Prudence shook her head, heart pounding. Who would be visiting on Christmas night, through the snow? The threatening men from town? Lucas motioned for her to stay seated as he approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" he called. "Doc Morgan," came the reply. "I've got Widow Jensen with me. Her son took a bad fall, and they need help." Relief washed through Prudence. She knew Sarah Jensen and her young son, who lived a few miles further up the creek. "It's all right," she told Lucas. "I know them." He opened the door to reveal the town's doctor and a frantic-looking woman in her 30s, both covered in snow. Behind them, a horse-drawn sleigh waited, steam rising from the exhausted animals. "Sorry to disturb you on Christmas," Doc Morgan said, his breath visible in the cold air. "But young William Jensen broke his arm something fierce, and his mama doesn't have what's needed to care for him. We're making rounds to collect supplies." "Of course," Prudence said, already moving toward her medical chest. "Come in, warm yourselves." As the doctor and Sarah Jensen entered, Prudence caught the woman's curious glance between her and Lucas. News of their living arrangement had clearly reached even the outlying homesteads. But in the face of a child's injury, gossip took a back seat to necessity. Prudence gathered clean bandages, a small bottle of laudanum for pain, and some willow bark tea for when the laudanum ran out. Lucas, meanwhile, stoked the fire, and offered the visitors coffee. "Thank you, Prudence," Sarah said gratefully as she accepted the supplies. "I don't know what we would have done." "How is William otherwise?" Prudence asked, concerned for the boy she had met several times at church before her own ostracism began. "Frightened but brave," Sarah replied. "The doctor set the bone, but the next few days will be difficult." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I'm sorry for how folks have treated you in town. It's not right." The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to Prudence's eyes. "Thank you," she managed. After warming themselves briefly, the doctor and Sarah prepared to leave, eager to return to the injured boy. As they donned their coats, Doc Morgan turned to Prudence with a professional eye. "How much longer until your time?" he asked. "About 3 months, I think," Prudence replied. "The baby should come in March." The doctor nodded. "Send word when the time comes. Whatever the town gossips say, I'll attend you." He glanced at Lucas. "Though I suspect you'll have help regardless." Once they had departed, the cabin seemed especially quiet. The moment from earlier had passed, leaving an unresolved tension between Prudence and Lucas. They worked together to clean up from dinner, moving around each other with practiced ease that spoke of their weeks of cohabitation. "What Sarah said," Lucas began as they finished, "about the town's treatment of you. It's nothing I haven't grown accustomed to," Prudence said, attempting lightness. "Widows are inconvenient reminders of mortality. Pregnant ones even more so." "It's wrong," Lucas stated firmly. "You deserve better." The simple declaration, spoken with such conviction, broke something inside Prudence. The emotional dam she had built after Thomas's death, fortified by months of judgment, isolation, and fear for her future, suddenly gave way. Tears came in a flood, and before she could turn away or apologize, Lucas was there, gathering her gently into his arms. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "Let it out." And she did, sobbing against his chest while he held her, one hand making soothing circles on her back. When the tears finally subsided, Prudence became acutely aware of their closeness, of the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, of the strength in the arms that held her so carefully. "I'm sorry," she said, pulling back slightly to look up at him. Don't apologize," Lucas interrupted softly. His gaze dropped to her lips for the briefest moment before returning to her eyes. "Prudence, she never learned what he intended to say, because at that moment, the baby delivered a kick so strong that Lucas felt it where his hand rested against her side. His eyes widened in surprise, then filled with wonder. "Was that?" Prudence nodded, a watery laugh escaping her. "Yes, he or she has been quite active lately." Lucas's hand hovered uncertainly near her belly. "May I?" The request was so respectful, so genuine, that Prudence found herself nodding again. She guided his hand to the spot where the baby most often kicked. For a moment, nothing happened, and then there was another strong movement against his palm. The smile that spread across Lucas's face was unlike any Prudence had seen before, pure joy mingled with awe. "That's amazing," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. Standing there in the firelight, his hand warm against her belly where her child grew, Prudence felt something shift irrevocably between them. This was no longer simply a practical arrangement for mutual benefit. This was becoming a family, unplanned and unconventional though it might be. The realization should have frightened her. It was too soon after Thomas, too complicated with the baby coming, too uncertain with Lucas's plans to continue west. But instead, she felt only a growing warmth, a sense of rightness that defied logical explanation. Later, as she lay in bed listening to Lucas's steady breathing from his place by the fire, Prudence allowed herself to imagine a future different from the lonely one she had resigned herself to. A future where Lucas remained, where her child had a father figure, where the cabin Thomas built became a home for a family he hadn't lived to see. The vision was so vivid, so achingly desirable, that it followed her into her dreams. January brought bitter cold and increasing challenges. Prudence's pregnancy advanced, making even simple tasks more difficult. The baby seemed to press against her lungs, leaving her short of breath, and her ankles swelled despite her efforts to keep them elevated. Lucas took on more of the household duties without comment, his concern evident in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. One particularly harsh night, With the temperature dropping well below zero and the wind threatening to tear the roof from the cabin, Prudence woke to intense discomfort. Her back ached fiercely, and the baby's movements felt different, sharper, more insistent. "Lucas," she called, fear tightening her throat. "Something's wrong." He was at her side in an instant, striking a match to light the lamp. In its warm glow, his face was etched with concern. "What is it?" "The baby." "I don't know," she admitted, wincing as another pain gripped her lower back. "It's too early, but something doesn't feel right." Lucas laid a gentle hand on her forehead. "You're warm. How long have you been feeling this way?" "The back pain started yesterday, but I thought it was normal." Prudence tried to sit up, but dizziness forced her back down. "Lucas, I'm scared. If something happens to the baby." "Nothing will happen," he assured her with a confidence he couldn't possibly feel. "I'm going to make you some tea, and then we need to decide if I should try to fetch the doctor." The thought of Lucas venturing out in the deadly cold filled Prudence with fresh terror. "No," she said firmly. "It's too dangerous. The trail will be impassable in the dark." "Your well-being is more important than any trail," he countered, but the howling wind emphasized the peril outside. Prudence grabbed his hand, holding it tightly. "Please, Lucas. I can't bear the thought of losing you too." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Lucas's expression softened, and he squeezed her hand in return. "All right, we'll wait until morning. But if things worsen, I'm going regardless of the weather." He prepared willow bark tea for the pain and helped her change into a fresh nightgown, his manner professional despite the intimacy of the situation. When she was settled back in bed, he surprised her by pulling a chair close and sitting down, clearly intending to maintain his vigil through the night. "You should rest," Prudence protested weakly. "I will rest when you and the baby are out of danger," he replied, his tone brooking no argument. Throughout the night, the pains came and went, never developing the regular pattern that would indicate true labor. By dawn, Prudence's fever had broken, and the worst of the discomfort had subsided. Lucas, true to his word, had remained awake, checking on her frequently and applying cool compresses to her forehead when the fever was at its height. "I think the worst has passed," Prudence said as morning light filtered through the window. "The baby is moving normally again." Lucas's relief was palpable. "Thank God," he murmured, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "But I'm still going to try to reach Doc Morgan today. I want him to check on you." "Lucas, you haven't slept. I've gone longer without sleep on cattle drives," he interrupted. "This is more important." His determination was both touching and frustrating. "At least eat something and wait for the day to warm up a bit," Prudence insisted. Lucas agreed to that much, though he was clearly impatient to be on his way. As he prepared a simple breakfast, Prudence watched him from the bed, struck anew by how seamlessly he had integrated himself into her life. The cabin that had felt so empty after Thomas now felt full of purpose and warmth, largely due to Lucas's presence. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for staying with me last night. For everything, really." Lucas paused in his work, turning to meet her gaze. "You don't need to thank me, Prudence." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "I care about you. About both of you," he added, nodding toward her rounded belly. The simple declaration warmed Prudence more than any fire could have. "I care about you too," she admitted softly. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since his arrival. But before either could elaborate, Prudence winced at a sharp movement from the baby. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked immediately, concern replacing the tender look on his face. "Yes," she assured him. "Just an enthusiastic kick. This little one seems determined to be a dancer." Lucas relaxed slightly, but remained watchful as they shared breakfast. Afterward, despite Prudence's continued protests, he prepared to make the journey to town for the doctor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystal-clear day, though the temperature remained bitterly cold. "I should be back by nightfall," he said as he donned his coat and the scarf Prudence had made him. "Stay in bed as much as possible. Everything you might need is within reach." "I'll be fine," Prudence promised, though anxiety gnawed at her at the thought of him traveling the treacherous winter roads alone. At the door, Lucas paused, turning back to look at her with an expression so intense it made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might return to her side, might give voice to the feelings that had been building between them. Instead, he simply nodded once and stepped out into the brilliant winter morning. The hours of his absence stretched endlessly. Prudence tried to rest as instructed, but worry kept her mind active. What if he encountered trouble on the road? What if his exhaustion from the sleepless night caused him to make a mistake? What if the lingering threats from town materialized while she was alone and vulnerable? By mid-afternoon, her concerns had grown so overwhelming that she rose from bed despite her promise to rest. Moving carefully, she stoked the fire and made herself tea, finding comfort in the familiar routine. The baby seemed calm now, occasional movements reassuring her that all was well after the frightening night. As the early winter dusk began to settle, Prudence lit the lamps and placed one in the window, a beacon to guide Lucas home. The gesture reminded her painfully of similar evenings waiting for Thomas to return from the mine. But this was different, she told herself. Lucas would return. He had to. Just as full darkness fell, the sound of horses broke the silence. Prudence moved to the window, relief flooding through her at the sight of two figures approaching Lucas and another man she assumed was Doc Morgan. She opened the door as they arrived, letting out a rush of warm air into the frigid night. "You should be in bed," Lucas admonished as he dismounted, though his expression belied the sternness of his words. The worry in his eyes told her how concerned he had been. "I'm much better," she assured him, then nodded a greeting to the doctor. "Thank you for coming all this way, Dr. Morgan." "Happy to help," the older man replied, stamping snow from his boots before entering. Lucas here was quite insistent. Rode into town like the devil himself was on his heels. While Lucas settled the horses in the stable, Doc Morgan examined Prudence thoroughly, asking questions about her symptoms and the baby's movements. His wrinkled face gave little away as he worked, but when he finally sat back, his expression was relieved. "What you experienced was likely false labor," he explained. "Common enough, especially for first-time mothers. The fever is more concerning, but it seems to have passed. I think you and the baby will be fine, but you need to rest more in these final months. Is there anything specific we should watch for?" Lucas asked as he returned from tending the horses, his use of "we" not lost on Prudence. The doctor glanced between them, a knowing look in his weathered eyes. Consistent contractions that grow stronger and closer together would indicate true labor. Any bleeding or significant reduction in the baby's movement should prompt an immediate trip to town, weather permitting. He left Prudence with additional instructions and some herbal preparations to help with the backaches and swelling. As he prepared to depart, declining their offer to stay the night due to other patients requiring his attention, he pulled Lucas aside for a private word. Prudence couldn't hear what was said, but Lucas's expression grew serious as he nodded in response. After seeing the doctor off, Lucas returned to the cabin, his movements betraying his exhaustion now that the crisis had passed. He removed his coat and hat, hanging them by the door before turning to Prudence with questioning eyes. "How are you really feeling?" he asked. "Relieved," she admitted. "And foolish for causing such alarm over what turned out to be nothing serious." "It wasn't foolish," Lucas countered firmly. "Better to be cautious, especially out here where help is distant." Prudence nodded, then gestured to the stew she had prepared during her time alone. "You must be hungry after your journey. And exhausted." "I could eat," he acknowledged with a small smile. "Though you were supposed to be resting." "Cooking is hardly strenuous," she replied, returning his smile. "And it kept my mind occupied while you were gone." They ate together at the small table, the familiar domesticity of the scene a comfort after the stress of the previous night and day. Lucas described his journey to town and back, including a brief confrontation with Mr. Wilcox, who had been spreading particularly vicious rumors about their living arrangement. "What did you say to him?" Prudence asked, both dreading and curious about the answer. Lucas's expression hardened momentarily. "I suggested that a man in his position should be more careful about the reputations he damages. The right word in the wrong ear could affect his business significantly." "You threatened him?" Prudence was shocked. "I reminded him of potential consequences," Lucas corrected mildly. "There's a difference." After dinner, Prudence insisted that Lucas take the bed for the night, given his lack of sleep. He refused just as adamantly, and they reached a stalemate until Prudence proposed a compromise. "The bed is large enough that we could share it," she suggested, her cheeks warming at the impropriety of the offer. Properly, of course, with a bolster between us if necessary. Lucas looked stunned by the suggestion. Prudence, I couldn't, it's practical, she interrupted, forcing her voice to remain steady. You need proper rest, and I would feel terrible knowing you're uncomfortable on the floor after all you've done. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. If you're certain, he finally said. And so they established a new arrangement, with Lucas sleeping fully clothed atop the covers while Prudence slept beneath them. The bolster she had offered proved unnecessary. Both were careful to maintain a respectful distance. But the simple knowledge of his presence beside her brought Prudence a comfort she hadn't expected, and she slept more soundly than she had in months. February arrived with alternating periods of harsh snowstorms and brilliant, brittle sunshine. Prudence's condition continued to advance, the baby growing ever more active as her March due date approached. True to Doc Morgan's instructions, she rested more, allowing Lucas to handle most of the household tasks. He proved surprisingly adept, revealing domestic skills acquired during his years of self-reliance on the trail. Their sleeping arrangement continued, evolving gradually as familiarity replaced awkwardness. The strict distance between them diminished over time, until one morning Prudence woke to find Lucas's arm draped protectively over her, his hand resting on her swollen belly. Rather than pulling away, she allowed herself to enjoy the warmth and security of his embrace, drifting back to sleep until his own waking movements signaled the start of the day. Neither mentioned the nocturnal closeness, but something had shifted between them. Touches that had once been careful and hesitant now came more naturally, a hand at the small of her back as he helped her from a chair, fingers brushing as they passed items at the table, a gentle tucking of hair behind her ear when it fell across her face. One evening, as a particularly spectacular sunset painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Lucas suggested they bundle up and step outside to watch. He wrapped Prudence in extra blankets and supported her carefully as they stood on the porch, the crisp air invigorating after days confined indoors. It's beautiful, Prudence breathed, watching as the colors deepened and spread across the western sky. Yes, Lucas agreed, though when she glanced at him, he was looking not at the sunset, but at her. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Prudence knew they were approaching a precipice. The practical arrangement they had established was evolving into something neither had anticipated when Lucas first carried her supplies home through the snow. Lucas, she began, uncertain how to put into words the emotions that had been building within her. When spring comes, I don't want to leave, he interrupted, the words rushing out as if he'd been holding them back for too long. Prudence, I know what we agreed. I know it's complicated with the baby coming and your mourning for Thomas. But these months with you, they've changed everything for me. His honesty took her breath away. Changed how? She asked, needing to hear him say it explicitly. Lucas turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. I've spent years wandering, never feeling like I belonged anywhere. But here, with you, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. He took a deep breath. I've fallen in love with you, Prudence. And if you'll have me, I want to stay. To help you raise your child, to build a life together. Tears filled Prudence's eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming emotion. I love Thomas, she said softly. Part of me always will. I know, Lucas acknowledged, his expression gentle. I would never ask you to forget him. But, Prudence continued, her voice growing stronger, I've come to love you too, Lucas. In a different way, but just as real. Just as true. The joy that spread across his face was like the dawn breaking. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, Lucas leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it made her heart ache. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped. When they parted, the sunset had deepened to purple and indigo, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. The February cold nipped at their exposed skin, but Prudence felt only warmth spreading through her. We should go inside, Lucas said, though he made no move to release her. Prudence nodded, but before they turned away from the spectacular view, she placed his hand on her belly where the baby was particularly active. He or she approves, I think, she said with a smile. Lucas's answering smile was radiant. Then that's all the blessing we need. The following weeks were filled with preparations not just for the baby's arrival, but for a future different from what either had envisioned. Lucas spoke of improvements to the cabin, of expanding it as their family grew, of perhaps raising horses on their land once he had saved enough to buy a few good breeding mares. Prudence listened to his plans, offering suggestions and sharing her own hopes. They spoke of how they would explain their situation to her child when it was old enough to understand how Thomas would always be honored as the child's father, but Lucas would be the dad who raised and loved it every day. As February gave way to March, Prudence's time drew near. Doc Morgan made a scheduled visit, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy and well-positioned for delivery. He raised an eyebrow at the obvious development in Prudence and Lucas's relationship, but made no comment beyond practical advice for the birth. "Send Lucas for me at the first sign of labor," he instructed as he prepared to leave. "First babies often take their time coming, but out here, it's better I arrive too early than too late." The doctor's visit left Prudence with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The reality of imminent motherhood both thrilled and terrified her. That night, as she and Lucas lay in bed, she confessed her fears. "What if I'm not a good mother?" She whispered into the darkness. "What if I don't know what to do when the baby cries or gets sick?" Lucas's arm tightened around her. "You'll be wonderful," he assured her, "and we'll figure it out together. Neither of us will have all the answers, but between the two of us, we'll manage." His confidence soothed her anxieties, and she drifted to sleep comforted by his presence and the promise of partnership in the challenges ahead. The next morning, Prudence woke with a different kind of discomfort than she had grown accustomed to. A dull ache radiated from her lower back around to her abdomen, coming in waves that seemed to have a pattern. She lay still, counting the minutes between sensations, wondering if this was the beginning of true labor. Lucas noticed her unusual quietness at breakfast. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concern. "I think," Prudence said carefully, not wanting to cause alarm prematurely, "that the baby might be coming today." Lucas's spoon clattered against his bowl. "Now? Are you sure?" Prudence couldn't help but smile at his sudden panic. "Not this very minute, no? But the pains have a rhythm that the false labor didn't. I think we should prepare, just in case." His expression shifted from alarm to determination. "I'll ride for the doctor right away." "Not yet," Prudence cautioned. "Remember what he said, first babies take their time. Let's wait until the pains are stronger and closer together." Lucas looked torn but ultimately nodded in agreement. "What can I do to help you now?" "Just be here," she said, reaching for his hand across the table. "And perhaps help me prepare the birthing area we discussed." They spent the morning arranging the cabin for the delivery, placing clean linens on the bed, and ensuring all the necessary supplies were easily accessible. Lucas heated water and kept the fire well stoked, moving with focused efficiency that barely concealed his nervousness. By early afternoon, there was no longer any doubt that Prudence's labor had begun in earnest. The contractions were coming regularly and with increasing intensity, causing her to pause and breathe deeply through each one. "It's time to get the doctor," she acknowledged after a particularly strong wave passed. Lucas was already donning his coat. "I'll be as quick as I can," he promised, dropping a kiss on her forehead before heading out the door. Alone in the cabin, Prudence paced slowly, finding movement helped ease the discomfort between contractions. She spoke softly to her unborn child, encouraging it to wait for Lucas's return before making its appearance. The labor continued to progress steadily but not alarmingly quickly, giving her hope that both Lucas and the doctor would arrive in time. The hours stretched on. Outside, the March afternoon began to fade toward evening, and still Prudence labored alone. The contractions grew stronger, requiring all her concentration to breathe through them. Between waves of pain, she wondered what could be delaying Lucas and the doctor. Had something happened on the trail? Was the doctor unavailable? Just as worry began to overwhelm her, the sound of horses approaching penetrated her pain-focused haze. Moments later, Lucas burst through the door, followed by Doc Morgan and, surprisingly, a middle-aged woman Prudence recognized as the doctor's wife, who occasionally assisted him with births. "Sorry for the delay," Lucas said breathlessly, rushing to Prudence's side. The creek had risen from yesterday's rain. and we had to find a safe crossing. You're here now. Prudence managed between contractions. That's all that matters. Doc Morgan took charge immediately, examining Prudence while his wife prepared additional supplies she had brought. You're progressing well, he announced after the examination. The baby should arrive within a few hours. Lucas stayed by Prudence's side throughout the ordeal, supporting her through each contraction, wiping her brow, and murmuring encouragement. As the pains intensified and came closer together, he remained steadfast, his strength becoming hers when she felt she could endure no more. I can't, she gasped during one particularly brutal contraction. Lucas, I can't do this. You can, he insisted, his voice firm but gentle. You're the strongest woman I know, Prudence Baker. And you're not alone. His unwavering belief in her renewed Prudence's determination. When Doc Morgan finally announced that it was time to push, she found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Lucas held her hand, absorbing her crushing grip without complaint, as she worked to bring their child into the world. And then, after what seemed like an eternity of effort, a new sound filled the cabin, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breaths. Prudence collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure but desperate to see the child she had carried for so long. A boy, Doc Morgan announced, placing the squalling infant on Prudence's chest after his wife had quickly cleaned and wrapped him. A fine, healthy son. Tears streamed down Prudence's face as she looked at her child for the first time. He had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face that was the most beautiful sight she had ever beheld. Hello, little one, she whispered. I've been waiting so long to meet you. She glanced up at Lucas, who was staring at the baby with an expression of such wonder and love that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Would you like to hold him? She asked. Lucas looked startled, then deeply moved by the offer. May I? Prudence nodded, and with the doctor's wife's help, the newborn was carefully transferred to Lucas's arms. The large, trail-hardened cowboy cradled the tiny infant with infinite gentleness, his entire being focused on the small life he held. He's perfect, Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. He bent to place a reverent kiss on the baby's forehead, then leaned down to do the same to Prudence. Just like his mother. While Doc Morgan tended to Prudence's post-birth needs, she and Lucas discussed the name they had selected if the baby was a boy. Thomas Lucas Baker, honoring both the father who had never had the chance to know him and the man who would raise him as his own. Welcome to the world, Thomas Lucas, Prudence said softly when the baby was returned to her arms. You are so loved. Doc Morgan and his wife remained for several hours, ensuring that both mother and baby were stable before preparing to depart. The doctor left detailed instructions for Prudence's recovery and the baby's care, promising to return in a few days to check on them. As the medical couple rode away into the crisp March night, Lucas closed the cabin door and returned to Prudence's side. The new family of three was alone together for the first time. How do you feel? Lucas asked, perching carefully on the edge of the bed. Tired, Prudence admitted. Sore, and happier than I ever imagined possible. Baby Thomas was sleeping peacefully against her chest, his tiny hand curled around her finger. Lucas gazed at them both, his expression one of profound contentment. I was thinking, he said after a comfortable silence, that once you're recovered enough, we might ride into town to see the preacher. Prudence looked up at him questioningly. I want to make this official, Lucas explained. I want to be your husband in name as well as in heart. And I want to be a proper father to Thomas. Joy bloomed in Prudence's chest. Are you proposing to me, Lucas Vance? His smile was tender as he reached out to caress her cheek. I suppose I am, Prudence Baker. Rather belatedly, considering we're already a family in all the ways that truly matter. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. Lucas leaned forward to seal the promise with a gentle kiss. I love you, he murmured against her lips. Both of you. And we love you. Prudence replied, glancing down at the sleeping infant. Don't we, Thomas Lucas? As if in response, the baby sighed contentedly in his sleep, secure in the knowledge, even if only on some instinctual level, that he was surrounded by love. The spring of 1880 brought renewal to more than just the landscape around Leadville. 6 weeks after Thomas's birth, when Prudence had sufficiently recovered from the delivery, She and Lucas rode into town with the baby securely bundled between them. They went directly to the small church, where the surprised preacher happily agreed to perform a simple wedding ceremony. Word spread quickly, and to their astonishment, several townspeople gathered to witness the union. Doc Morgan and his wife were there, of course, but also Sarah Jensen and her son, his arm now healed, and even a few miners who had worked with Thomas Baker and respected his widow's determination to forge a new life. Mr. Wilcox was notably absent, though rumors had begun circulating that his business was suffering as more people chose to take their trade to the competing general store that had opened at the far end of town. Standing before the preacher, with baby Thomas sleeping peacefully in Doc Morgan's wife's arms, Prudence and Lucas exchanged vows that formalized the commitment they had already made in their hearts. Lucas promised to cherish Prudence and raise Thomas as his own, while Prudence vowed to build a future with the man who had first helped her as a stranger and then become her dearest love. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would create together. The small congregation applauded, and for the first time since Thomas Baker's death, Prudence felt fully accepted within the community again. After the ceremony, they declined offers of celebration in town, preferring to return to their cabin, their home, to begin their married life quietly, just the three of them. As they rode back, with the spring sunshine warming the air and new growth visible on the mountainsides, Prudence reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how differently things might have turned out if Mr. Wilcox hadn't refused to serve me that day in December," she replied. "If you hadn't been there to help." Lucas smiled, adjusting his hold on the reins to reach for her hand. "Some might call it chance. I call it fate. Either way," Prudence said, returning his smile, "I'm grateful." Back at the cabin, Lucas carried his new bride across the threshold, baby Thomas still nestled in her arms. The gesture made them both laugh, acknowledging the unusual order of their courtship and marriage. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," Lucas said, setting her gently on her feet. The name was new, but the feeling wasn't. This cabin, once built by one man's love and now filled with another's, had truly become home. And as Prudence looked at her husband and son, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, a family forged not by conventional beginnings, but by compassion, respect, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected of circumstances. In the years that followed, the Vance family thrived. Lucas used his savings and knowledge of horses to establish a small but reputable breeding operation, while Prudence turned her skills with needle and thread into a modest business, making clothes for the growing number of respectable women settling in Leadville as the mining town matured. Thomas Lucas Vance grew into a strong boy with his birth father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. When he was 3, a sister joined the family, Emma Rose, named for Lucas's mother and Prudence's grandmother. 2 years later, they welcomed another son, James. The cabin expanded alongside their family, with Lucas adding rooms and modern conveniences as their prosperity increased. But they never forgot the humble beginnings of their love story, how a pregnant widow refused service at a store had found not just supplies, but a lifetime of love and support from a cowboy who chose to carry her burden home. And occasionally, on cold December evenings when the snow fell thick outside their warm and bustling home, Lucas would recount the story to their children, always ending with the same words. "Sometimes the greatest treasures come from the most unlikely places. Your mother taught me that, and it's the most valuable lesson I've ever learned." Prudence would always smile at this, reaching for her husband's hand across their family table, grateful beyond measure for the man who had helped her when no one else would, and who had ultimately helped her find the strength to build a new life filled with love, purpose, and joy.